So, whether you're a chemistry teacher who wants to turn bad, or you're a low-level criminal who needs a helping hand, you'd better call Saul. This Breaking Bad spin-off kinda came out of nowhere in 2015, and it's been nothing short of a smash hit, being nominated for 53 Primetime Emmys. Breaking Bad is a hard act to follow, but how well does this show hold up? Well, today, we're gonna find out, as I'm gonna be going through each and every episode so I can give you the entire story of Better Call Saul. I know literally everyone under the sun knows the ground rules here, but let me give you the basics anyway. Let's start with Saul Goodman, or should I say, Jimmy McGill. This series is set a few years before the events of Breaking Bad when Saul was still using his real name Jimmy. He's nowhere near as successful, and he's just a newly appointed public defender making minimum wage. Then you've got Kim Wexler, Jimmy's best friend, and, well, let's just say there's something more there. She's a seriously impressive lawyer with an even more impressive ponytail. Chuck McGill is another character you guys should know. He's basically the best lawyer of all time and Jimmy's big brother. They don't see eye to eye, but we'll talk more about that a bit later on. I think that's it for the main characters. There's still a load of new and old characters to come, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. For now, let's dive on into the first episode. Which is aptly called Uno, and before we get into the meat of it, I just want to remind you of something Saul Goodman said at the end of Breaking Bad.
Month from now, best case scenario, I'm managing a Cinnabon in Omaha.
You're still part of this, whether you like it or not.
And it looks like Saul was right, because the episode opens like most of them do, with this moody, black and white flash forward to the events after both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. Although, that's not Jimmy McGill or Saul Goodman, that's Gene Takovic, Jimmy's new identity that was given to him by Ed. And he is, in fact, a manager of a Cinnabon in Omaha. Scarily good guess by him. We see Gene tearfully looking back at his past, watching reruns of old Saul Goodman commercials, which, to be fair, I'd watch too. They're gold. His story, as you all know, started long before that, and the show takes us back to 2002, where we see a fresh-faced Jimmy McGill trying to make a living as a public defender in Albuquerque. Yeah, at one point in his life, he was actually on the side of the law. He fights hard in court, but his reward is a measly $700. I know that sounds like a lot, but some of those lawyers are on that an hour. Then, to kick him while he's down, he tries to exit the courthouse parking lot and is stopped by the man in the booth. A man all of you will recognize. Yep, before all of his dodgy dealings, Mike was just a lowly courthouse security guard. Mike makes Jimmy head back inside the courthouse to collect a sticker, otherwise he has to pay a fine. After dealing with that, Jimmy heads to a meeting with Betsy and Craig Kettleman, a cookie-cutter suburban couple being investigated for embezzling a sizable chunk of change. Jimmy puts on the charm, offers his services, but they're a bit cagey, politely uninterested, and clearly looking for someone with a shinier office and cleaner reputation. Driving away, Jimmy multitasks by ordering flowers for the couple, hoping a gesture might win them over. Being on the phone whilst behind the wheel causes Jimmy to lose control and do this. The skater's brother appears out of nowhere, filming the scene and threatening to call the police unless Jimmy pays them off, but he sees right through the act. This is an old con, one he practically invented. Slippin' Jimmy knows a hustle when he sees one. That name will crop up once or twice later on, so I'd keep that in mind.
Does a steaming pile of scream payday to you, huh?
Back in his office, which is really a tiny boiler room behind a Vietnamese nail salon, Jimmy opens a check from Hamlin McGill, a law firm where Chuck, his brother, is a partner. Jimmy also used to work there as a mailboy. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Jimmy's a lawyer. Why doesn't he work there? Well, there's a lot to unpack with that one. You'll see why a little later on. The payment is something he didn't ask for and definitely doesn't want. He tears it up and storms into HHM's pristine lobby, accusing Howard Hamlin of trying to cheat his brother Chuck out of his stake in the firm. Basically, Chuck has been ill for a little while with something called electromagnetic sensitivity, meaning he can't be around anything that holds an electric current. So while he's been dealing with that, Jimmy's been fighting for HHM to pay his brother his rightful share of the company, as it's kinda unlikely he'll be coming back. Howard, however, thinks that Chuck can battle through it, and he's still the asset he was when he was well, so the money he sent Jimmy was actually to cover any of Chuck's costs while he can't work. Actually a pretty decent deal if you ask me. So later that night, Jimmy visits Chuck. The brothers have an argument about Chuck's health and about Jimmy being forced by HHM to not use the name McGill when he eventually opens his own firm. Things fizzle out between the pair as Jimmy sets his sight on his first scheme. He tracks down the skateboard twins and tells them about his Slippin' Jimmy days. Together, they cook up a plan to get the Kettlemans' attention. One of the twins will get accidentally hit by Betsy's car. Jimmy will swoop in, save the day, and maybe land some real clients. But as usual, things go sideways. The car they follow does not belong to Betsy. It belongs to an older lady. The twins chase her down, follow her into her house.
¿Qué pasa?
Habla English. We call a policia.
And when Jimmy shows up minutes later to stop it, he gets pulled inside at gunpoint. Because waiting for him is none other than Tuco Salamanca. Miho opens up, showing us the moments before Jimmy's arrival, with Tuco humming to himself in the kitchen while preparing a fresh batch of salsa. It's kinda eerie seeing him be a bit normal, isn't it? But that all changes when his abuelita comes home and mutters about two boys harassing her. And right on cue, the very same boys come crashing into their home, talking about being run over, limping, and demanding some cash. But, as we all know, they've got the wrong house and are really poking the bear. In the blink of an eye, Tuco switches from sweet to psycho, grabbing his abuelita's cane off the wall and beats both brothers into the tile floor without breaking a sweat. He then calls up his boys Nacho and Nodos to bring his van so they can deal with the mess. That's when Jimmy shows up and gets dragged inside by Tuco, where he's shoved against a wall and held at gunpoint. Jimmy tries to explain, saying the boys didn't mean to offend anyone, but Tuco's not buying it. He leads Jimmy to the kitchen, where Cal and Lars are duct taped and moaning on the floor, and the second Jimmy takes the gag off one of them, Lars immediately sells him out. So with that, they're all going on a field trip to the desert. Jimmy tries to plead with Tuco and his boys about letting them all go, that this is all a big misunderstanding and that he's a lawyer.
I'm Special Agent Jeffrey Steele, FBI.
FBI.
This is where Nacho steps in with some logic, telling Tuco that killing a lawyer is a great way to bring the wrath of the law down on their heads. For once, Tuco sees reason and decides to let Jimmy go. Hooray! Oh, yeah, but he still wants to kill the twins. Jimmy goes straight back and into a bargaining plea and manages to bring Tuco down from killing them to just breaking a leg apiece before letting them go. Now free again, Jimmy drags what's left of Cal and Lars to the hospital, then stumbles into a bar to decompress with a drink. But it doesn't go well. One guy next to him cracks a breadstick and the sound alone sends Jimmy's stomach into overdrive. By the time he gets to Chuck's house that night, he's wrecked. He even forgets to leave his phone outside like he's supposed to and collapses on the couch. This forces Chuck to throw away Jimmy's cell, and in the morning they argue again before Jimmy heads back to his sad little office. No offense, Jimmy. But as that nightmare finally looks to be over, Jimmy is paid a visit by Nacho, who offers him a proposition. He wants to rob the Kettlemans, says they've got over $1 million, 1.6 to be exact, stashed away, and he's willing to cut Jimmy in. Jimmy backs off, says he's a lawyer, not a criminal, but Nacho doesn't push. He just scribbles his number on a matchbook and leaves it on the table, telling Jimmy to call when he figures out what game he's really playing and whose side he really wants to be on. The seeds of Saul Goodman are being planted. The next episode opens with not a flash forward, but a flash back. All the way back to 1992, where Chuck visits Jimmy in the Cook County Jail. He's in prison after he was caught defecating through a sunroof. This is basically the time when Jimmy was Slippin' Jimmy, before he turned good and started his legal career. Back in the present though, Jimmy is anxious about Nacho's plan to steal from the Kettlemans. He calls Kim Wexler, a lawyer at HHM who's representing the strange couple. Talking of strange couples, Kim and Jimmy are kinda a thing at this point in the series, but also kinda aren't. She broke through in HHM around the same time Jimmy was a mailboy, and they developed their relationship from there. Jimmy warns her of any potential danger regarding Nacho's plan, and after speaking to Kim, he realizes he needs to anonymously warn the Kettlemans too.
Kettlemans, you're in danger! You're in danger!
I'm sorry, what?
The next morning, Kim tells Jimmy that something has happened to the Kettlemans, so he rushes to their house, which is surrounded by police, and finds that the family is missing. Believing Nacho has kidnapped them, Jimmy tries unsuccessfully to reach him by phone. Jimmy is then picked up by police, who tell him they have arrested Nacho and that he has requested Jimmy as his lawyer. Nacho admits to Jimmy that he surveilled the Kettlemans, but denies kidnapping them. He warns Jimmy that if he does not get the charges dropped, Nacho will have him killed, as he thinks Jimmy has ratted him out, and the people who are connected to the cartel certainly don't like rats. Jimmy is unsuccessful at persuading the police to release Nacho, but promises he'll work something else out. So he calls Kim and convinces her to take him to the Kettlemans' house so he can investigate. Obviously, Jimmy isn't some detective, but he figures out things aren't adding up and wonders if the Kettlemans have staged their own disappearance. I mean, it's perfect, right? They owe loads of cash and now they have a way out by basically being dead. Jimmy then stupidly runs this idea past Mike at the courthouse, but instead of dismissing it, Mike actually agrees. Mike thinks that not only are the Kettlemans faking everything, they're likely way closer to home than anyone realizes. With this, Jimmy starts snooping around their house once again and finds out that their back garden backs up into a desert plain, and in that plain, the Kettlemans have set up camp and are in hiding. The fourth episode of this series, Hero, opens up once again in 1992, where Jimmy and a buddy stumble out of a bar in Chicago. Jimmy's cracking jokes, and he's got a familiar name on his lips. They round a corner into a quiet alley where they see a man, drunk, whose wallet is not only full of cash, but also has an impressive Rolex on. The two argue about who will get the watch, but eventually agree that Jimmy will keep the cash, as well as more from the ball crawler's own wallet. Good enough deal, right? Well, it was actually just a huge scam pulled off by Jimmy and the big guy, revealing they have a ton of fake Rolexes left. In present-day Albuquerque, Jimmy's standing with the Kettlemans with a lawyer pitch ready to go, but they're not biting. Instead, they offer him a bribe, straight-up hush money, to keep quiet about their very illegal $1.6 million. Well, that and the fact they've lied about their disappearance. We know Jimmy isn't doing so hot in the financial department, so he takes them up on their offer. He tries to dress it up as something it isn't though, and insists this is a retainer, which is fancy lawyer talk for "I'm your lawyer." With the Kettlemans back in town, Nacho is let out of jail and he goes straight for Jimmy, breathing down his neck about who warned the Kettlemans. So Jimmy pretty much confesses he was the one who let them know. With the Kettlemans' cash flowing, Jimmy gives himself the full makeover treatment. New threads, slick hair, and a billboard that looks suspiciously like it belongs to Howard Hamlin. HHM doesn't take it lightly. Kim gets it in the neck and Howard is so furious that he sues Jimmy, forcing him to take down the billboard at once. Jimmy's not giving up without a show though, and if the news won't cover him, he'll make his own story. He hires a film crew, stages a dramatic rescue by hiring an actor to fall whilst taking down the billboard.
Me. No, not me. Get him. He's me. Yeah, like that.
You've actually got to give him props. Luckily, due to Chuck's condition, he won't be able to see it covered on the news. So instead, Jimmy makes sure that when he drops off Chuck's newspaper, he takes the one out with the rescue story. Chuck has an inkling, though, that Jimmy is hiding something from him, and when he notices a change in his newspapers combined with his young brother's track record, he does something he thought he'd never do: go outside. Despite all his fears about electricity, he swipes a copy from the neighbor's driveway. Chuck knows what game Jimmy was playing, and knows this was all about the McGill name argument they had in the first episode. The next episode begins with Chuck being on the end of a police sting. No, really. His neighbors have reported the fact he stole their newspaper, and due to the nature of Chuck's living arrangements, they think he's making meth. You're pretty warm, guys, but this is the wrong show. But before Chuck is given a chance to explain himself, he has to face his greatest fear in the strongest way possible.
Definitely no tasers. I can't emphasize that enough. Deal?
Yep, they tase him. Meanwhile, Jimmy's riding high from his little billboard rescue stunt. Clients are calling, attention's rolling in, but most of the people lining up aren't exactly the cream of the legal crop. One guy wants to secede from the US, another's got a toddler toilet prototype with a built-in voice recorder, which is genuinely one of the weirdest things across both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. By the way, when you're done with Better Call Saul, you can always go and binge our video on Breaking Bad to see just how much Jimmy changes. Talking of the devil, Jimmy meets Mrs. Strauss, a sweet old lady who's obsessed with her porcelain Hummels, especially the rare Alpine Shepherd boy. She wants her will written, wants her figurines passed on with love, and Jimmy's the man for the job. Well, I mean he can do the job. Money's money and Mrs. Strauss pays up in full. That night, over a beer, Kim tells him he might have found his calling in elder law, but before they can finish the convo, Howard calls to tell Jimmy about Chuck. Cut to the hospital, and Chuck's lying in a bed, surrounded by machines he swears are killing him. Cause they're teeming with electricity. You get the deal now, guys. The man doesn't like electronics, but the doctor isn't buying it. She flips on the electronics while Chuck sleeps, and nothing. No panic, no symptoms. The doc says it's all in his head, that he needs help, like real help, the kind you only get in a mental facility. But Chuck refuses to be committed, and Jimmy's right there backing him up.
Coleman lanterns indoors, a camp stove. He could burn his house down.
Howard then shows up, and suddenly the whole picture snaps into place. If Chuck's declared incompetent, Jimmy gets guardianship, and if Jimmy gets guardianship, he can push for a full payout of Chuck's partnership at HHM. Howard can't let that happen, so Jimmy leans into it, threatens to have Chuck committed just to make Howard sweat. He eventually gives up the ghost and signs Chuck out of the hospital and takes him home. His brother tells him that he found out about the billboard stunt, and Jimmy promises he'll play by the rules from now on. But Chuck's not exactly sold, and to be honest, are any of us? We know what he's like. But let's give him the benefit of the doubt. He's got that elder thing going for him now and a whole new catchphrase. Need a will? Call McGill. I'm really mad at how much I like that. The next episode we'll be covering, 5-0, is completely about Mike. Remember earlier when I said Mike was part of the Philly police? Well, the whole reason he retired from the force was due to his son Matty being shot while on duty. It turns out that two corrupt cops called Fensky and Hoffman got Matty tangled up in some of their dodgy dealings. But because Matty is a straight arrow usually, they got cold feet and thought he was gonna rat on them, so they dealt with him. Obviously, they do it in a way where no one can prove anything, apart from Mike. He knows what they did. So in a flashback, we see Mike mourning Matty at a bar, waiting for the cops and faking being drunk to get a ride home. On the way to his house, Mike slips that he knows what they did to his son.
I killed him because you were scared what you thought he might do.
So they drive him out somewhere quiet to deal with Mike too. But all this time, Mike had been faking the drunk shtick and quickly turns the tables on them, getting his revenge for Matty. Back in the present day, we see the Philly police coming to question Mike over the deaths of the officers. And who does he get to represent him? Jimmy McGill. He actually gets Jimmy to pull a little coffee stunt too, so Mike can steal one of the investigators' notebook to see just how close they are to finding out what he did. Then, Mike goes to visit Stacy, Matty's wife, to admit what happened. But worse than that, Mike admits that he was the one who convinced Matty to take Fensky and Hoffman's deal. Easily one of the best episodes of the show, in my opinion. In Bingo, Jimmy finds Chuck standing outside his house, trying to build up a tolerance to electromagnetism. I always found it so weird with Chuck. One episode he'd be like this, and the next it's like a torch would be enough to tip him over the edge. Anyway, Jimmy starts storing his case files there, hoping to reignite Chuck's passion for the law. He even shows Kim an office space he's considering moving into because the elder law is doing wonders for him. He even asks her if she'll join him and become partners in a firm, but she turns him down, wanting to stay loyal to HHM, which is fair enough, they paid to put her through law school. So Kim gets to work with her own clients, namely the Kettlemans. The cat is out of the bag now with what Craig's done with the money, so Kim suggests a plea deal. Return the stolen $1.6 million, and Craig gets 16 months instead of 30 years. Sounds like a good deal, right? Well, not if you're Betsy Kettleman. The pair fire Kim and rehire Jimmy, who urges them to take the deal Kim gave them. But Betsy blackmails him, pointing out that the retainer they paid implicates him in their crime. She's the brains of the operation for sure. It gets worse for Jimmy when he discovers Kim's been demoted for losing the Kettlemans as a client. Feeling guilty, he tries to figure out a way to get them to take the deal, so he turns to Mike. Mike kinda owes him one after the notebook thing from last episode, so he agrees and sprays fluorescent liquid on some cash from Jimmy's bribe and plants it outside the Kettlemans' house. The Kettlemans find it, assume it's from the embezzled money, and add it to their stash. Mike breaks in, uses a blacklight to trace the money to a false bottom in a bathroom cabinet, and takes the hidden moolah.
Jesus. Gets bigger every time I look at it.
Then, Jimmy has him deliver it to the district attorney before the Kettlemans can even blink. He visits them the next day to deliver the good news, and old Betsy doesn't take it well. After gentle nudging, they have to accept Kim's plea deal, giving Craig a reduced sentence and putting him back in good standing with HHM. In Rico, Jimmy's days take an unexpected turn when a client at the Sandpiper Crossing tells Jimmy that the nursing home they're in controls their finances. Intrigued, Jimmy reviews her invoices and quickly suspects something's off. He starts collecting more statements from other residents, and the pattern soon becomes clear. Sandpiper's been systematically overcharging its elderly tenants for like decades. Back at Chuck's house, the brothers sift through the paperwork, piecing together the evidence, and Chuck's kinda spurred on by the excitement of what Jimmy's found here. He thinks that they could have a class action lawsuit on their hands, which is more lawyer schmoyer speak for big money. Jimmy is ecstatic, not because of the case or the money though, because he gets to see the legendary legal mind his brother has in full flow. Jimmy heads to the facility, only to be stonewalled at the front desk. He hears the unmistakable sound of shredders in action. They're trying to destroy the evidence. So, thinking fast, he scribbles a demand letter on toilet paper, insisting they cease destroying evidence, and hands it to a manager as he's escorted out.
You're shredding in there. I'm not deaf. I can hear you. Stop right now.
That night, Jimmy dives into Sandpiper's dumpsters, retrieving bags of shredded documents so he and Chuck can painstakingly piece together the fragments. Okay, when I said both of them, I just meant Chuck. Just as a little side note, this is also the first episode we see Mike doing more of his shady stuff on the side. He visits a vet called Dr. Caldera, who is like a criminal middleman who gives him jobs. Just so you know. Back on the legal front, Sandpiper's attorneys arrive at Chuck's place to try and settle the score. I should also mention that the lead attorney for Sandpiper is Rich Schweikart. We'll be seeing more of him as the series goes on. Of course though, they deny any wrongdoing but offer a $100,000 settlement. Jimmy counters with evidence suggesting the fraud crosses state lines, making it a RICO case. Chuck has remained pretty silent up until now, but he's about to up the ante. They weren't expecting that, so with the line drawn in the sand, Rich and the team leave licking their wounds knowing the book is about to be thrown at them. The episode Pimento opens up with Chuck warning Jimmy that Sandpiper's lawyers are gearing up to slap him with a restraining order, which Jimmy swiftly shuts down before it goes through. But when he returns to Chuck's place, ready to press forward, he walks into a wall of paperwork. It's a pretty common tactic amongst lawyers. When they're trying to protect a client, they do stuff like that to A, buy time, and to B, exhaust you so you give up. But Chuck has an idea. He suggests the case might be getting too big and maybe it's time to hand it over to HHM. Jimmy hates the idea, but reluctantly sets up a meeting. But that night, as Jimmy sleeps on Chuck's couch, he sneaks out of the house and uses Jimmy's phone to call Howard. Okay, see what I mean about this electro mumbo jumbo? It only affects him when it suits him. Anyway. The call Chuck gives Howard is essentially to cut Jimmy out of the deal as a working lawyer on the case, but he'll still get a big cut of money and a finder's fee. But he again won't be allowed to work in HHM.
Go to hell, Howard. I'm not giving you my case.
Meanwhile, over in Mike's world, he's sizing up a new job. A guy named Daniel Wormold wants protection during a back alley drug deal, and Mike's up against two other contenders. One of them is a mountain of a man, and the other is Trevor from GTA. I'm not even joking. And when he tries to taunt Mike over turning up with no weapons, he gets wasted. Mike obviously gets the job and walks Daniel through the deal, and you'll never guess who it's with. Nacho. Back with Jimmy, Kim tells him to take the money and build his own future, but something's eating at him, and then he puts it together. He realizes that Chuck used his phone last night and orchestrated the entire thing. So Jimmy marches straight to Chuck and tells him he's taking the deal, but he knows the truth now, and he has to hear his brother say probably the most cutting thing he could say.
What? You're not a real lawyer.
He's majorly lost it, hasn't he? After that spiteful monologue from Chuck, Jimmy starts the next episode off by handing over the caring responsibilities of his brother to Howard. He also reignites an old flame in Cicero, meeting his friend Marco, who we met a little earlier, to go back to the Slippin' Jimmy days. But the glory days don't last long, as Marco suffers a heart attack mid-scam, leaving Jimmy literally as low as he can go. Well, for now at least.
Hey, wake up, man! Come on! Marco! Buddy!
But then, Kim calls and offers Jimmy a golden chance at being a lawyer again. Basically, the Sandpiper case is now too big even for HHM, so they've partnered up with another firm called Davis & Main. And the good news is that the new firm is interested in hiring Jimmy onto their team for the case due to his relationship with the old folks at Sandpiper. They can't get enough of Jimmy. He agrees to meet with the partners of the firm, but chickens out at the last second. Not before having one last little convo with Mr. Ermintrout. He talks to Mike about the fact that they never took the Kettleman's money, and that they were stupid not to. He promises Mike that whatever stopped them from taking it will never stop him again. The second season opens up with another flash forward to Omaha, where Gene is closing up the Cinnabon for the night and accidentally locks himself in the mall's trash room. He considers using the emergency exit, but the alarm would alert the cops. So he waits. Nearly 2.5 hours pass before a janitor finally opens the door, and when he leaves, we see he's been busy. Back in the main timeline, Mike turns down another job from Price, which is Daniel's street name. Why does a guy like that need a street name? He's also rolling around maybe the most ridiculous car I've ever seen. I think Krusty the Clown would say that ride is too loud. Price tells Mike that this is who he is, and if Mike doesn't like the flashy new him, he can take a hike. Mike's experience is enough to know that this guy is a busted flush anyway, so he lets him do whatever the hell he wants. Meanwhile, as we know, Jimmy turns down the job offer from Davis and Maine. Instead of going back to how things were, though, he disappears to a high-end hotel under a fake name, lounging by the pool like nothing's wrong. Kim tracks him down and presses him on why he's throwing away such a big opportunity. Jimmy tells her the truth. He only became a lawyer to impress Chuck. And now that Chuck has made it clear he doesn't believe in him, the motivation is gone. I know he's living like a middle-aged dad right now, but can you blame him? That night, Jimmy and Kim pull a con on a loud businessman named Ken. They trick him into picking up their massive tequila tab by pretending to be siblings who've just come into a lot of money thanks to Uncle Humphrey?
You ever try Zafiro Neo?
No, I have not, but I'm down for whatever. Three of whatever she just said.
After the high wears off and a night with Kim, if you get what I mean, Jimmy reconsiders and accepts the job at Davis and Maine. He's given a sleek company car, a personal assistant, and the fancy Cockabolo desk he's always wanted. Without Mike as backup, Price meets with Nacho, who uses the chance to get Price's real name and home address from the glove compartment. Soon after, Price's house is broken into, and the entire stash of pills he had has been taken, along with his favorite collectible baseball cards. So, what does this guy do? He calls the cops. The next episode begins at the courthouse, where Mike spots Daniel showing up looking rattled. Daniel tells Mike about the break-in at his house and how his beloved baseball cards were stolen. Mike warns him to stay away from the cops, says it's not worth the heat, but Daniel won't back down. He wants those cards back no matter what. So, Mike offers to handle it himself to keep things quiet. He knows that the only guy it could be is Nacho, so he pays him a visit. But it seems all for nothing, as Nacho refuses to hand them over.
But you underestimated just how big an idiot you were dealing with.
But Mike has a card to play of his own. Get it? Mike knows that Nacho is involved with Tuco, who's higher up on the food chain than him, so if he finds out Nacho has been doing this side business without cutting him in, it won't end well. So Nacho folds, and they work out a deal. Daniel trades his ridiculous Hummer for the return of the baseball cards and 10 grand in cash. Meanwhile, Chuck is sitting in on a joint meeting between HHM and Davis and Maine. Jimmy is there too, but he's uneasy when the topic of Sandpiper comes up. Kim gives him a look, a quiet push to keep going, and Jimmy does, powering through the presentation. Later, Mike asks Jimmy for help. Daniel still needs to meet with the cops, and Mike wants Jimmy to represent him, to make sure he doesn't say anything stupid. So Jimmy tags along to the station, where Daniel tells the detectives that his baseball cards have magically reappeared and there's no need for further questions. But the cops are not buying it. Mike was right all along. This guy is beyond a liability. To get them off Daniel's back, Jimmy pulls the mother of all stories out of his bag of tricks. Ah, yes. The Hoboken Squat Cobbler. We've all done one of them, haven't we? Well, somehow this actually works, and the cops are so bamboozled by his story that it buys Daniel some time. But Jimmy tells him that he'll have to film himself squatting on a cobbler, just in case they ask for proof. In Amarillo, Jimmy presents his outreach report from other Sandpiper locations at a big strategy meeting with HHM and Davis and Maine. He announces he's added 24 more plaintiffs to the case, which gets some nice praise, but Chuck isn't convinced. Can this guy be happy for his brother, at all?
You didn't do a song and dance in the day room for the old timers?
No.
Jimmy knows the mailers to the clients aren't getting through, either because the residents ignore them or the staff's tossing them before they're seen. So he pitches a TV ad, something flashier that'll cut through the noise. Cliff seems interested and says they'll talk when he's back from a trip. Jimmy checks out one of the firm's old ads and thinks it's completely flat. No showmanship at all. So he brings back his old film crew, shoots a brand new ad, and sends it to a station in Colorado Springs, without asking anyone. The ad hits the air and the response is huge. Over 100 new clients in a single day. It's actually a pretty good ad too, but when Cliff finds out Jimmy aired it without permission, he's furious.
Howard said you were a little eccentric. He didn't tell me you were a goddamn arsonist.
Meanwhile, Dr. Caldera offers Mike a new job from someone who specifically asked for him, and the employer is Nacho Varga. Gloves Off starts with the partners at Davis and Maine being less than thrilled. Jimmy's commercial may have pulled in new clients, but the fact that he ran it without telling anyone rubs everyone the wrong way. Cliff sits him down and lays it out. What he did crossed the line, but they're not firing him, not yet. He's getting one more shot, though from now on, every step he takes will be under a microscope. Jimmy, already feeling the pressure, leaves Kim a rushed voicemail, hoping to explain before things spiral, but it's too late. She's already in the middle of it. At HHM, Howard and Chuck are pressing her hard, asking why she didn't give them a heads up about the ad. Kim stays calm and takes responsibility, saying she didn't think it needed flagging, but that doesn't matter to Howard. He strikes Kim down, blaming her for giving HHM a bad name. Jimmy then heads to Chuck's place and finds Chuck curled up on the couch, fully dressed but wrapped in his space blanket. Chuck refuses to go to the hospital, says he's fine. So Jimmy throws another blanket over him and sits down beside him for the night. Yeah, covering yourself in tinfoil because you've got a fake illness is totally fine. By morning though, Jimmy's had enough. He tells Chuck it wasn't right to let Kim take the fall, especially when she had nothing to do with the ad. Chuck does what he does best and hits Jimmy where it hurts. He even refuses to help Kim when Jimmy offers to give up law for good. Meanwhile, Mike and Nacho are scoping out a restaurant where Nacho and Tuco handle business. Basically, Nacho wants Mike to take out Tuco because he's becoming too much of a problem.
Drive over, pull up in a spot next to Tuco's, pop, headshot, roll out.
But Mike knows who Tuco is related to and quickly shuts that idea down. So Mike comes up with another way. He calls the cops ahead of time, then sets up a low-speed fender bender in the parking lot. So, when Tuco storms outside to check the damage, Mike pokes at him just enough to trigger a beatdown. Doesn't look good, does it? A mid-level crime boss beating an old ex-cop to within an inch of his life. And what's worse, Tuco takes the bait. The cops pull up, and Tuco's arrested on the spot, charged with assault with a deadly weapon because he was also carrying a gun. Mike then meets Nacho to get his payment, while Tuco is looking to go away for a long time. In Rebecca, we start back in 1992, where Chuck's living normally. No sign of his supposed sensitivity. He even changes a light bulb. Jimmy drops by for dinner not long after arriving in Albuquerque, and Chuck's wife Rebecca is instantly taken with Jimmy's charm, which makes Chuck visibly uneasy. Yep, Chuck had a wife. They split when Chuck got sick because, like everyone else, as much as she cared for Chuck, she couldn't deal with his issues. Going back to the present now, Jimmy finds Kim stuck in HHM's document review room and floats the idea of suing for discrimination, but Kim shuts it down, says it'd be career suicide, and tells him to focus on his own mess. At Davison, Maine, Jimmy's stuck with Aaron, an annoying associate following him everywhere. Acting helpful, but Jimmy quickly realizes Cliff's sent her here to keep an eye on him after the commercial stunt. Determined to claw her way out, Kim uses every spare second calling old contacts, eventually landing Mesa Verde Bank, a huge potential client worth millions. Howard accepts the client with a smile, then keeps Kim buried in doc review and brushes off her role. It's like they can't directly hurt Jimmy, so they're manipulating someone else he cares about to make him squirm. Mike, meanwhile, is paid a visit by a familiar face, Hector Salamanca. Without all the bells and whistles, though, this is Hector before he got ill and he's still at the helm of the cartel. He wants Mike to help reduce Tuco's sentence by saying the gun at the scene was actually Mike's.
I would like for you to tell the police that the gun was yours.
He sweetens the deal by promising $5,000 and gives Mike some time to think it over. We then see Jimmy struggling to fit in at Davison, Maine. He can't sleep in his new fancy apartment, so he sneaks back into his old boiler room office and sleeps like a baby. In the morning, feeling a little better, he leaves Kim a voicemail singing Bali Ha'ai. Meanwhile, with Chuck's push, Kim gets moved out of document review, but Howard keeps her on the sidelines with meaningless, losing cases, meant to keep her in her place. In court, Kim handles one of those cases sharply, and it catches the eye of Rich Schweikart, who pulls her aside and offers her a spot at Schweikart & Coakley. See, I told you to keep old Rich on the back burner. He offers better pay, better benefits, and get this, real work. Kim doesn't know what to do, and to blow off steam, she and Jimmy run another con, skimming $10 grand from an investor before spending the night together. In the morning, Kim says they'll keep the check as a souvenir and admits she's jealous of how Jimmy always seems to know what he wants. Mike, meanwhile, has had enough time to think about Hector's offer.
We were just supposed to scare you, that's all.
You try harder next time.
And he refuses. Hector doesn't take it lightly and threatens Mike's family, but when Mike begins to pull out his gun, Hector sees something in him and hears him out. $50,000 is the price, and it's $50,000 he gets paid. Well, he splits the money with Nacho because he didn't hold up his end of the deal with keeping Tuco off the streets for the foreseeable. The next episode opens with Jimmy representing Mike, when he tells the prosecutor the gun found during his fight wasn't Tuco's. After the hearing, Jimmy decides he's done with Davison, Maine. But when he finds out quitting means paying back his hefty signing bonus, he starts thinking, there's a loophole. If they fire him without cause, he keeps the money. So he launches a full campaign to get booted, showing up in loud suits, blasting bagpipes in his office, leaving mess everywhere, basically doing everything short of lighting the place on fire. Eventually, Cliff snaps and fires him, telling him keeping the bonus isn't worth the headache of having him around. Jimmy heads back to his old nail salon office, almost jumping for joy in some weird way. He then pitches the idea to Kim about starting a law firm together again. With the way things are going at HHM and that tempting offer from Rich Schweikart, she probably is in a good space to go along if things were done by the book. Problem is, Jimmy can't do it that way, and he's honest about it, so Kim turns him down. But she does have an idea. Instead of a joint firm, why don't they share an office space and run 2 solo firms?
Separate firms under one roof.
Seems like a good idea to me, and that's what they go with. Kim heads straight to Howard's office and hands in her resignation, which he accepts with a smile. But the second she's out the door, the race for Mesa Verde begins. Because if Kim can snag them into her own firm, that is basically her maid as a solo attorney. So she meets with Kevin and Paige from Mesa Verde and pitches her vision, easily landing them. So she and Jimmy set up shop in a converted dentist office, hopeful and ready to go. But the win for Kim and Jimmy doesn't last long. Howard tells Chuck about Kim's exit and the loss of Mesa Verde, so Chuck drags himself out despite his condition and meets with Kevin and Paige in person. He compliments Kim, but badmouths her just enough to plant doubt, and it works. Mesa Verde pulls out and sticks with HHM. Ernesto, another HHM employee, tells Jimmy that Chuck's worse than ever, so Jimmy steps in to help. The whole Mesa Verde thing really did a number on Chuck because he dragged himself out and masked his problems, leaving him completely empty.
You were fantastic. Oh, Chuck?
Jimmy manages to use the time Chuck's out of action to sneak into Chuck's files and alter Mesa Verde's paperwork at a midnight copy shop. In Nailed, Jimmy's back in full ad mode, filming himself in front of an American flag at an elementary school for a new commercial. Basically, his Sandpiper ad was a hit, so if Jimmy's gonna go it alone, he figures elder law is still the way to go for him. So he gets the creative juices flowing.
If you like making love at midnight, in the dunes by the Cape, see?
Meanwhile, at the New Mexico Banking Board, the application Chuck submitted for Mesa Verde gets flagged for errors, which delays the new bank branch by 6 weeks. Jimmy's plan has worked, and a frustrated Kevin walks away from HHM, giving the account back to Kim, who promises Mesa Verde will be her full-time focus. When she and Jimmy go to Chuck's place to collect the files, Chuck accuses Jimmy of sabotage, but Kim pushes back, saying Chuck just made a simple mistake. Come on, Chuck. It happens to the best of us. I mean, in this case, yeah, it was sabotage, but don't let a little thing like that get in the way. Kim knows deep down that Chuck's right though, but she can't exactly complain. He more or less saved her legal career. Kim then tells Jimmy that she doesn't want to know how the files got messed up, but warns that if Jimmy left any trace, Chuck's gonna find it. Jimmy panics and heads to the copy shop to buy the clerk's silence, only to find Ernesto already there asking questions. When the clerk confirms Jimmy's been in there before, Ernesto rushes off to get Chuck. Jimmy waits, bribes the clerk, then hides across the street.
Rob a bank?
No way am I that cool. Sometimes I go number 2 and I don't flush.
Chuck arrives, starts questioning the clerk, but his symptoms flare up in a place literally packed to the rafters with electronics and he collapses. The season 2 finale Kick begins with a flashback to 1999, where Jimmy and Chuck sit by their dying mother's hospital bed. Jimmy steps out to grab sandwiches, and while he's gone, their mother wakes and only wants one of her sons. She sadly passes soon after, and when Jimmy returns and hears the sad news, Chuck denies that she woke up or ever said a word. Back in the present, Chuck's still unconscious on the floor of the copy store. Jimmy rushes in, gives first aid, and tells the clerk to call an ambulance. At the hospital, Chuck puts it together from his bed. Jimmy bribed the clerk. That's why he was there, but Ernesto is clearly worried about Chuck's mental health. So he covers for Jimmy, saying he called him to the scene. Chuck isn't happy, but Ernie did his old mailroom pal a solid there. Jimmy refuses to commit Chuck to psychiatric care, but agrees to temporary guardianship so the doctors can run tests. They find no physical injury and again say that it's all in his head. Surprise, surprise.
See? Feeling better already.
Mike, meanwhile, buys a rifle and sets up in the desert to kill Hector Salamanca, but he can't get a shot without risking Nacho. Just as he's ready to wait it out, he hears his car horn blaring. So he rushes to it where he finds something waiting for him. I'll give you one clue who that message was from. It rhymes with Shmustavo Ping. Back with Chuck though, he's soon signed out and back under the watch of Howard, but it's not long before he returns to Jimmy for help. So Jimmy heads over and finds the walls covered in space blankets. Chuck blames his condition for the Mesa Verde mistake and says he's too unstable to keep going. This tugs at Jimmy's heartstrings, and to ease Chuck's guilt, he tells him he's right. He sabotaged his work. Chuck doesn't say much, but as Jimmy leaves, he quietly pulls out a tape recorder that caught every word. Season 3 starts with Jimmy telling Howard that Chuck's not stepping down from HHM. He helps Chuck tear down the space blanket walls and finds an old copy of The Adventures of Mabel, a book they loved as kids. Jimmy tries to reconnect, but Chuck cuts it off. saying he's never going to forget how Jimmy sabotaged him over Mesa Verde. Yeah, he really isn't gonna forget. Chuck plays Jimmy's taped confession for Howard, who questions what good it does in the grand scheme of things because Mesa Verde's not coming back.
Chuck, this tape. I'm not sure exactly what it accomplishes.
Plus, the tape can't be used in court. It's entrapment or something like that. It's time to check in with Mike again, who's still haunted by the warning he found after trying to kill Hector. He checks his car for a tracker, finds nothing, and eventually dismantles the whole thing at a junkyard. Still nothing. But at a gas cap display, it hits him. He opens the one from his car and finds the hidden tracker inside. Mike then goes to Dr. Caldera and gets an identical tracker and figures out how it works. He swaps it into the gas cap, drains the original's battery, then waits. Early in the morning, someone shows up to replace the old tracker with a fresh one. Only this time, the one they walk away with is Mike's, and just like that, he's now got a tail to follow. I know this is said often, but Mike might be the coldest character ever. The next episode picks the Mike stuff right back up, as we find him watching as the two men he's been tracking hand off the device from his car to a courier. He follows the courier all the way to Los Pollos Hermanos, where the signal stops moving. The chicken man is nearly ready to make an appearance. But for now, we've got to head back to Jimmy and Kim, who are hiring a receptionist for their joint but solo firm, Wexler McGill. One of Francesca's first tasks as a receptionist is to answer calls, and one of them's from Mike, asking for a meeting. So they do the next morning, where Mike gives Jimmy the job of going inside Los Pollos Hermanos and keeping an eye on the courier, who is also Victor from Breaking Bad. Jimmy agrees and goes into the fast food joint where he watches the guy toss something in the trash, so he goes to pick it out. But as he's got his hand in the trash, he's interrupted by the owner of the restaurant. Jimmy ends up leaving empty-handed with nothing that suspicious going on. Back at Wexler McGill, Ernesto pulls Kim aside and admits he heard Jimmy's taped confession.
Changed 1261 to 1216. It was me.
Turn that off! Turn it off!
Kim tells Jimmy, who immediately figures out Chuck set him up. Kim says they should wait and see what Chuck does, but Jimmy's already in the car, furious. At Chuck's house, Jimmy confronts his brother and, in a fit of rage, smashes the tape. That's when Howard and another witness step out of the shadows, confirming Chuck now has what he needs to press charges: the destruction of evidence. The episode's sunk cost starts with Mike being roped into a meeting with Gus as he wants to know why he's been spying on him. Gus tells Mike he must stop any plans to kill Hector, and he'll stop tracking him. He can, however, continue to disrupt Salamanca's business as Gus hates Hector, so Mike pitches a plan to get the police involved without anyone getting hurt. He heads to Mexico, meets with Barry Goodman, and picks up a small stash of cocaine.
And what's that in grams? This big.
He hides it in one sneaker, then tosses the pair over a power line on a road he knows Hector's trucks use. When the next truck approaches, the drivers stop to hide their weapons before reaching the border. Mike, hiding nearby with a scoped rifle, fires a few warning shots into the air to make them think a hunter's nearby. As the truck pulls away, Mike fires again, this time hitting the sneaker and spilling the cocaine onto the vehicle. At the border, the dogs pick it up and the drivers get arrested, and the rest of the drug operation is seized and busted. It's not going so well for Jimmy, though, who's now been arrested for breaking into Chuck's home. He represents himself in court, pleads not guilty, and posts bail. Prosecutor Kyra Hay tells Chuck she plans to go after Jimmy hard, but Chuck floats another idea. Jimmy tells Kim that Chuck wants him to confess in writing and submit it to the New Mexico bar, a deal that would keep him out of jail but cost him his law license. Chuck's plan is simple. He wants to stop his brother from practicing law. He can be and do whatever he wants, but he can't be a lawyer. If he wants his freedom anyway. Upon hearing the game that Chuck's playing, Kim decides she'll take on Jimmy's case and help in the best she can. Mike's still keeping tabs on Hector, this time watching his ice cream shop as the police show up. Hector then shows up at Los Pollos Hermanos with Nacho and Arturo, pushing into the restaurant and intimidating staff while they wait for Gus.
Should I call someone? No. That will not be necessary.
When Gus arrives, Hector tells him it's time he started using Gus's trucks to move his drugs, not realizing that's exactly what Gus wants. There's also this clip, and considering Gus is a clean freak, this is a serious power move by Hector. To battle back against Chuck, Jimmy gets Mike to pose as a door repairman so Mike can sneakily take photos of Chuck's house to show the court and jury what he's living like, because no truly sane person can live like a baked potato. After doing that favor for Jimmy, Mike meets with Gus again, who starts floating the idea that the pair start working together. In chicanery, you all know where this one's going, Jimmy asks Dr. Caldera if he knows someone with a light touch for a delicate job. I wonder who that could be. Well, For now, the bar association plans to use Jimmy's taped confession from the break-in, and Kim knows Chuck will back it up under oath. That gives them a shot to cross-examine him and shine a light on his supposed condition. In her opening statement, Kim frames it not as a case about legal misconduct, but a story about a long-running feud between two brothers. The courtroom is arranged for Chuck's sensitivity, and Howard testifies that Chuck didn't want to hire Jimmy at HHM, claiming it was to avoid nepotism. Howard even goes as far as to say that if it was up to him, Jimmy would have got the job years ago, as Howard liked his get-up-and-go attitude, even giving him the nickname Charlie Hustle. But before Chuck testifies, he runs into that person Jimmy hired for the job. Now on the stand, Chuck is pressed by Jimmy about his condition and asks him to find the nearest source of electricity. Chuck assumes it's a trick and guesses Jimmy has something electronic hidden. Jimmy reveals a phone, battery removed, and Chuck explains that's why he doesn't feel symptoms. Then, Jimmy asks Chuck to check his pocket. Jimmy says Huell slipped it in earlier, and Chuck's had it on him for nearly 2 hours without any reaction. When the bar's lawyer says Chuck's health isn't relevant, he snaps.
I took him into my own firm. What was I thinking? He'll never change.
He launches into a rant about Jimmy, calling him dishonest, reckless, full of chicanery. Did I even use that right? I swear no one knew that word before the show. He's halfway through the tirade when he realizes the whole room's gone silent, stunned by what they've just seen. And to make matters worse, his ex-wife Rebecca is in attendance. Picking up right where we left off, Kim gives her closing argument to the Bar Association's disciplinary board, and the committee hands down its decision. Jimmy's suspended for a year, but he's not banned from being a lawyer. Result, I guess. Howard checks in on Chuck afterwards and tells him to let this be the end of it, calls it a win, and urges him to move on. But we all know he ain't letting this one go. Now, Jimmy has been disbarred. He realizes he'll lose money if his prepaid ad slots run without a client, so he rushes to cancel them. When he finds out that canceling early will still cost him thousands, he comes up with a new idea. With Sherry's help, he films a commercial pitching himself as a producer and spokesman for local businesses. And you guys might notice that that's Crazy 8.
Saul Goodman.
Yeah, it's like, it's all good, man.
Anyway, Hector forces Nacho to make an example out of him, if you know what I mean. This is the episode where we also see Gus scope out the laundry he eventually uses in Breaking Bad, along with another familiar face. Back over with Hector, he demands that the cartel use Nacho's dad's upholstery shop as another front for their business. Nacho is super against that because he knows his dad is an honest man who just wants to get on. But he does notice that Hector needs some sort of pill to keep things in working order, and he makes a mental note, and so should you guys at home. In expenses, Jimmy's stuck doing community service, picking up trash while running Saul Goodman Productions from his cell phone.
Can we make this easier? Just split it 4 ways?
I'll split you 4 ways.
Because, along with his year banned from practicing law, he was also hit with a hefty community service charge too. Jimmy's burning through his savings, trying to pay his half of the rent for the Wexler McGill office block, but he's just not getting many bites. So to get some money, he visits his insurance agent and tries to get a refund on his malpractice coverage, but the agent says no. What's worse though is that his premiums will spike once he's reinstated, so he turns on the waterworks. That doesn't work either, but he does tell the agent about Chuck's mental breakdown. Meanwhile, Nacho breaks into Daniel's house and offers him $20,000 to help replicate Hector's pills. Daniel later asks Mike for protection during a meeting with Nacho, where Nacho tells Mike that Hector wants to use his father's shop as a front, and as I said before, he won't have it. Problem is, he'll go to the cops and that'll get Nacho's father killed. Nacho's plan is to switch out Hector's heart pills and let him die. Mike warns him that once it's done, he'll need to switch the fakes back for the real ones just to cover his tracks. I wonder what a certain Gustavo Fring will think about all this. The episode's slip starts with something shocking. Chuck speaks with Dr. Cruz and admits he's finally started to believe his electromagnetic sensitivity might be in his head. It's only taken him nearly 3 whole seasons. Dr. Cruz warns him not to rush, but he's already pushing himself, even leaving the house to grab groceries. The electric is back on, and he doesn't even need help with the stuff at HHM. Jimmy, meanwhile, produces a decent ad for a local music store, but the owners stiff him on the payment, so he falls back on old tricks, staging a fake slip and fall right in their shop to get the money.
You guys have liability insurance, right?
Back at the office, Kim finds Jimmy with his half of the rent, which he got from the music store stunt. She's still worried though. Kim knows this isn't sustainable, and she starts thinking about taking on more clients. Nacho finally moves against Hector. He swipes the pill bottle from Hector's coat, swaps the nitroglycerin capsules for ibuprofen, then slips the bottle back into place without anyone noticing. In fall, Jimmy finds out from Irene Landry, his old Sandpiper client, that the company's made a settlement offer. If they decide to take the money, Jimmy will be coming into $1.16 million. So, yeah, he really wants them to accept. Howard doesn't quite see it that way, and he thinks there's far more blood to squeeze out of the Sandpiper stone. Remember when Mike was messing with the Salamanca's shipments a little while ago? Well, he'd been stashing some of the money from those stings away, but he couldn't touch the money due to its nature, shall we say. So he turns to Gus, who suggests setting him up with a big client of his to help launder the money, Madrigal. Mike becomes a contracted security consultant for Madrigal, and he hands off the cash to Lydia and starts receiving clean monthly payments in return. Kim, meanwhile, sticks to her word and takes on a second client, Gatwood Oil, just in case Jimmy can't keep up with his share of the office he's suspended. Over with Nacho, he's running out of time. The pills aren't acting quick enough to take down Hector, so instead he has to do the worst thing he can think of: tell his dad the truth. At HHM, Chuck and Howard meet with the malpractice insurance reps, who inform them Chuck must be supervised due to his condition or HHM's rates will skyrocket. Chuck wants to fight, but Howard says no and pushes him into retirement.
I can't be partners with someone whose judgment I don't trust.
So Chuck responds by trying to sue HHM for $8 million, the value of his partnership. Unlucky, Chuck. That's what you get for being literally the worst human on planet Earth. Back on the Sandpiper front, Jimmy starts manipulating Irene's social circle, isolating her, turning her friends against her, making her feel like she's holding everyone back, and it works. She agrees to settle and Jimmy gets his payout. He rushes to tell Kim the good news, but she's too busy prepping for a big meeting with Gatwood. She's working herself into the ground, so much so she can't even drive straight. After the crash, Kim's got her arm in a cast and returns to the scene with Jimmy to collect her scattered case files. Jimmy blames himself, knowing Kim only took on a second client to help cover their shared office costs. To ease the pressure, they agree to give up the office and Kim starts working from home. Jimmy, meanwhile, fumbles big time when he accidentally lets it slip to Aaron from Davis and Maine that he manipulated Irene to settle. She reports back to the team, and this causes the entire agreement to collapse, and Jimmy is once again penniless. At HHM, Chuck tells Howard he'll drop the lawsuit if he can stay on, but Howard shuts that down and hands them a check for $3 million, the first chunk of a buyout. He doesn't want the drama for the firm, so Howard is paying this out of his own pocket, and as one last final gesture, agrees to hide all this behind the guise of Chuck retiring. After that, Chuck goes home to find Jimmy, where they try to patch things up, but Chuck's as cutting as ever.
But the truth is, you've never mattered all that much to me.
Hector then shows up at Manuel's shop and tries to force his way in by paying cash up front. Manuel reluctantly accepts to protect himself, but he's clearly not happy. Nacho's ready to make another move, but just before he acts, he's pulled into a meeting with Hector, Gus, and Juan Bolsa. Yep, Juan from Breaking Bad. You know he's one of the founding members of the cartel? He says Gus will now handle all cross-border smuggling for both operations, totally cutting out Hector's supply chain. This sends Hector into a fit of rage, and Nacho's pill switch finally catches up to him. After he deals with Jimmy, he goes absolutely nuts, tearing his house to shreds over this electromagnetic mumbo-jumbo, and with nothing left to fight for, knowing he'll never be a lawyer again, Chuck ends it. That fire engulfs his home and takes him with it. Even though Chuck's like the worst guy ever, and even if he's right, I do like to think that being so mean to Jimmy the last time they spoke was his way of softening the blow of what's coming. Season 4 opens with Howard calling Jimmy and Kim with the news about Chuck's house catching fire. They arrive just as Chuck's body is being removed, and Jimmy sees the ruined appliances. Realizing Chuck's condition must have come back, he sinks into himself, barely speaking, letting Kim deal with Howard, who says he'll handle all of the funeral arrangements. I bet Howard's just delighted that he doesn't have to pay that $8 million. Back on the Madrigal front, Mike receives his first payment from them, but doesn't accept the job at face value. Instead, he wants to create a real story. So he does a full inspection and tells the manager to make sure Lydia knows he showed up in person. At Chuck's funeral, former colleagues offer Jimmy their condolences, and after the service, Howard pulls Jimmy and Kim aside and admits he believes Chuck's death is his fault, that he forced him out of HHM when the insurance premiums became a threat. Actually, I take back what I said about Howard. That took a lot of guts. In Breathe, Jimmy searches for work during his suspension and interviews for a sales job at Neff Copiers. While there, he notices a display of Hummel figurines and clocks, one that looks valuable. The owners seem cautious about hiring someone who just left law, and says they'll follow up after other interviews. Jimmy heads for the door, then spins back around and delivers a slick, aggressive pitch that completely wins them over. They offer him the job on the spot, and he immediately turns it down, disgusted by how quickly they gave in without checking anything.
You guys are like a couple of cats. Like, come and wave a shiny object around. You're like, I want that.
Then, Lydia meets with Mike to complain about his surprise security audit at Madrigal, reminding him the job was supposed to be fake, just a way to launder the stolen cash. Mike argues the audits give everything a believable cover if anyone digs. When she takes it to Gus, he quietly backs Mike's decision. I told you guys that earlier, Lydia needs to catch up. Howard, meanwhile, sits down with Kim and Rebecca to go over Chuck's estate. Jimmy's left a sealed letter and $5,000, which is just enough money to prevent someone who should be in a will from legally challenging it. Even from the grave, this guy is breaking Jimmy's balls, although Chuck's letter is pretty nice. To keep things hush-hush around Hector, Gus brings in Dr. Bruckner from Johns Hopkins to handle his care, making sure she can speak directly to his family and allowing him the free rein to treat him. While that's going on, Nacho and Arturo show up at the chicken farm to pick up their shipment. Arturo pushes for a sixth brick, copying what Nacho did before, and strong-arms Gus's crew into handing it over. He then tells Nacho he knows exactly what happened with Hector's pills and that he hasn't told the Salamancas. And now Nacho works for him. In Something Beautiful, we see Nacho's first assignment for Gus. He's to stage a fake ambush on the drug pickup he made with Arturo. They fill his car and Arturo's body with bullets. Then, Tyrus shoots Nacho in the shoulder as planned and adds another shot to the gut to make it look real. Nacho calls the cousins, who arrive, torch the car, and rush him to Dr. Caldera, where the vet saves his life. Meanwhile, Juan Bolsa tells Gus that the constant disruptions to the drug shipments are getting risky, and suggests Gus look into finding a stateside supplier instead of relying on Mexico. And he has just the cook in mind to kickstart the operation. I'll give you a couple of clues to who it is. He likes coffee, he loves tofu, and he can't get enough of Walt Whitman.
You should tell the chemist to check his or her cookware. It's introducing contamination.
Kim, meanwhile, gets back to work with Mesa Verde, but when Kevin shows her the bank's expansion plans, she starts to lose interest. The aggressive growth bores her, and she pushes more work to Viola, Kim's new assistant, while asking to be dropped off at the courthouse instead. Basically, Kim wants to get down to the nitty-gritty of law. She wants to defend people who need defending, not some posh snobs in suits. The next morning, Kim gives Jimmy the letter Chuck left him, and he flips it open and gives it a read. The letter says all sorts of corny stuff, but this is my favorite line. Now, you might think that Chuck being so nice to his brother is strange. Well, it is. You've got to remember that this will was most likely written way before Jimmy passed the bar or went to the University of American Samoa for his law degree. Chuck was happy while Jimmy was beneath him, but as soon as Jimmy tried to make something of himself, Chuck hated it. And it was that hate we saw him spread in the first 3 seasons. The episode Talk is ironically named, as Jimmy literally takes a job as a manager of a cell phone store just to get out of going to therapy. And by the way, this store is dead. No customers coming in, no other staff, heck, I'm not even sure a tumbleweed would want to visit that store. But Jimmy uses his situation to his advantage and figures there are a lot of people on the street who would love a pay-as-you-go phone. Or burners, I think they're called in the trade. Back over with Nacho and the nearly dying thing. To sell the fake ambush on him and Arturo, Victor delivers the Salamanca's drugs to the Espinosa gang. That's when Nacho tips off the cousins, who wipe out the Espinosas and reclaim the product. With the cousins heading back to Mexico, Gus is now free to expand, and Nacho is starting to realize just how much control Gus is taking.
Get some rest. You have more to do.
After another fake inspection at Madrigal, Mike meets with Gus, who's upset Mike didn't warn him about Nacho's attempt to kill Hector. Mike reminds him that the only promise he made was not to pull the trigger himself. Then, he cuts to the point. He knows Gus didn't bring him here to scold him. He brought him for a job, and Mike wants to know what it is. In quite a ride, Jimmy's out on the street selling his pay-as-you-go phones under a new slogan, "Privacy sold here." Okay, so he's not exactly a marketing whiz, but the phones are selling like hotcakes. But things go sideways when 3 teenagers jump him and steal everything. Kim helps patch him up, and Jimmy admits he should have seen it coming but wasn't thinking straight. Meanwhile, Mike escorts a series of engineers through the industrial laundry, scouting the site for Gus's underground lab. One guy talks big and acts like the job will be easy. Gus hears everything from behind a wall and immediately cuts him loose. Then, Werner Ziegler walks in, honest and cautious, says it's risky but doable. Gus likes his attitude and offers him the job to oversee the entire construction.
Es freut mich, Ihre Bekanntschaft zu machen.
Werner Ziegler.
Back in the courtroom, Kim's thriving with her public defender work, handling criminal cases and loving the pace of it all. Just as she's finishing up in court, Paige from Mesa Verde calls and says they've got a paperwork crisis. Kim waits until she finishes her current cases, then shows up. Paige tells her the in-house team had to fix the mess and reminds her that Kim promised Mesa Verde would be her top priority. Well, Kim's priorities have changed. I mean, she doesn't tell them that, she just kinda says sorry, but we all know she's had enough of the Mesa Verde mob. In Pinata, Kim meets with Rich Schweikart and pitches the idea of leading a new banking division at Schweikart & Coakley, and almost without hesitation, he hires her. Kim then goes to Jimmy to break the news that their partnership is fully over, and the poor guy doesn't take it well. He has a full-blown panic attack. Meanwhile, Gus and Mike are figuring out how they're going to provide housing and security for Werner and his crew as they begin prep for the underground lab.
Entertainment system here, DVD player, projector and screen setup might be nice.
They manage to get it covered, and Mike explains the ground rules to the German boys. It's tight security, no phones, full isolation, all inside a warehouse. And they've kinda got it made. Although one of Werner's men named Kai seems to be someone that might not gel well with Mike and Gus, even if Werner vouches for him. Gus then visits Hector in the hospital and tells him a quiet, unsettling story about a childhood coati back in Chile. He trapped it when it stole fruit from his tree, and instead of killing it quickly, he let it suffer until it died. Just as he's going to do with Hector. Jumping back over to Jimmy, he stops by HHM to collect his $5,000 inheritance, where he meets Howard, and he admits the firm's reputation is falling apart, clients are walking, and things are getting worse. Jimmy gives him a sharp little pep talk, telling him to stop wallowing and take control. With the money, Jimmy buys a huge load of burner phones and goes back to selling on the street. And when the same three teens who robbed him last time try again, they walk right into a trap. Guess that's where the title of the episode comes from. The next episode opens with Jimmy showing Huel a small, rundown storefront he's considering for his future law office before he heads with Kim to a Schweikart and Coakley party. Jimmy tries to blend in, hoping to have a good time, but the longer he's there, the more out of place he feels. He slips away and wanders into Kim's office, sees how sleek and impressive it is, and realizes just how far behind he really is. At Hector's hospital, Dr. Bruckner shows Gus a video update. Hector's starting to respond cognitively, and if they act fast, maybe Gus could give Hector a second chance at life. But obviously he picks the darker path, ordering the doc to stop all treatment as he wants to keep Hector exactly where he has him. Over at the lab site, progress is slow and the crew's patience is thinning. Kai and Casper start fighting and Mike steps in to break it up. Werner once again fights in Kai's corner and says that the team is just shattered. They need a break from all this non-stop isolated work. Talking of work, Jimmy's still slinging those burner phones, now operating out of a van on the edge of town. An off-duty cop stops by and tells Jimmy that while he might not be breaking the law, the type of customers he's attracting are scum. They break out into an argument when Huel turns the corner and sees his friend being attacked, but he doesn't realize it's by a cop. With Huel in custody, Kim agrees to represent him, but doesn't want any of the usual funny business that Jimmy usually stirs up. She tries to make a deal with the prosecutor to go light on Huel, but she won't budge. But Kim gets an idea of how she might be able to twist her arm, so she calls Jimmy and heads to an office supply shop. After hearing what Werner said about Kai and the rest of the boys, Mike decides to give in, and take them all for some rest and relaxation. And by that, I mean he takes them all to a strip club. Hey, just because Mike's old doesn't mean he doesn't know how to unwind. But Kai ends up getting the group kicked out, so they head to a quieter bar, but then it's Werner who causes trouble by having one too many drinks. Spilling the secrets of the business is like the biggest no-no, but Mike has a soft spot for Werner, so he gives him one last chance. But as for Kim's plan, it's twofold. One, she's going to bury the prosecutor in as much paperwork as she can if she moves to keep Huel in custody. And two, with a bunch of office supplies, she tells Jimmy to take a bus down to Huel's hometown in Louisiana and use the office supplies to write letters of love and support for the big guy. You know, in the hope that either the prosecutor or the judge sees the letters of support and thinks, actually, this guy can't be some big criminal if he's this well loved, Judge Munslinger receives a flood of letters postmarked from Coushatta, all defending Keel as a beloved community figure, and pressured by the sudden outpouring, he tells the prosecutor and Kim to work out a plea deal. But Suzanne decides to do some digging into these letters, where she finds a few numbers to call. And you best believe Jimmy's got that covered.
Shame on you!
With that, Suzanne drops the biggest charges on Huel, and he gets away with a slap on the wrist. Nacho, meanwhile, is mostly recovered from his gunshots and now has a bigger role in the Salamanca operation. Big enough to finally meet Lalo Salamanca. I like to think of Lalo as if he's the Joker. He oozes charisma, but he's the most dangerous man in any room he steps in. Lalo and Nacho visit Hector at the nursing home, where Lalo brings up a memory from the past, how Hector once burned down a hotel and killed the owner just for being disrespectful. That's when he pulls out a keepsake from that memory, a concierge bell. Yep, so that's how Hector became Mr. Ring-a-Ding. Lalo then has Nacho introduce him to Gus at Los Pollos Hermanos, then pushes to see the chicken farm for himself, wanting to know exactly where the drugs get delivered once they're across the border. This is basically the Salamanca's highest-ranking cartel member now. I know you guys either know or have already got that, but Lalo is a big deal. Werner's team finally blasts through the last rock blocking the lab elevator shaft and celebrates, thinking they're almost done. Werner asks to fly home to see his wife for a weekend, promising to come back and finish the job. Mike says no, but offers him one extra phone call instead, and Werner agrees.
When it's done, from the money you've made here, you'll never be away from your wife again.
Jimmy attends his reinstatement hearing, but is denied practicing law again. And he really can't figure out why. He's obviously heartbroken, so he heads home to talk to Kim about it. She instantly tells him where he went wrong. But he never mentioned Chuck. Not once. Since Chuck's death and their feud were at the center of his suspension, the board probably saw that as a red flag. That night, Jimmy walks into Kim's apartment and silently starts packing up his stuff. She stops him and asks if he still wants to be a lawyer, and he does, but he just feels like everyone is suffocating him. The next morning, Mike checks security footage and notices something wrong. There are dead pixels in the feed. He digs deeper and finds Werner used a laser to blind the cameras, cutting through the rooftop locks and escaped by climbing down the side of the building. Mike now knows exactly what Werner's done, and that he might have gone too far to be saved. Season 4's finale opens with probably my favorite flashback of the entire series, to Jimmy and Chuck at a karaoke bar singing this ABBA classic.
I was in your arms, yeah, thinking I belong there.
But back in the present, Mike tracks Werner to a money wire agency, where he convinces the clerk to let him view the security footage. He pieces together that Werner's probably heading to a hot spring resort to meet his wife and starts calling around to find him. While on the hunt, Mike notices Lalo's car tailing him and manages to lose it. But Lalo arrives at the wire agency soon after, kills the clerk, watches the footage, then begins calling hotels until he finds Werner himself. You see, Lalo and the rest of the Salamancas smell a rat with Gus. They think something deeper is at play, and they're right. He's trying to cut them out of the meth game altogether with his top-secret lab. Lalo finds Werner at the hotel, and before he can spill any of the beans, Mike arrives to shut it down. That's the final straw for Gus. He's given Werner plenty of chances and decides he has to die. Mike refuses to let anyone else but him pull the trigger.
God damn it.
Trying to own up to the mistake of sticking his neck out for Werner. But as we know, Mike has a real soft spot for him, so he lets Werner call his wife and convince her to return home, because he knows Gus's men will want to kill her too. And then, this happens. Now, that's just devastating. Werner is just the nice, hardworking man who loved his wife and wanted to see her. It's genuinely so sad. But hey, at least it was quick. Meanwhile, Jimmy has been prepped by Kim on what to say and do at his appeal. It's got to be all about Chuck. So Jimmy starts reading Chuck's letter, then pivots into a heartfelt speech about his brother, saying all he ever wanted was to be worthy of the McGill name. The panel buys it, and so does Kim, who seems genuinely moved. But after they leave, Jimmy drops the mask and tells her the whole thing was a performance. He's been reinstated. And when he asks the clerk for a DBA form, he makes it clear he's not going to practice under the McGill name. He's got another name from here on out. Season 5 gets underway with Jimmy telling Kim that the Saul Goodman name he used for selling burner phones has built him a ready-made client list, perfect for launching a criminal defense practice. Saul, let's just stick with Jimmy. Jimmy kicks things off with a flashy promotion event, handing out 50% coupons to drum up attention. To push it even further, he stages a fake argument with Bill Oakley, a fellow attorney, and even films it for that extra layer of publicity. Because Lalo's now hovering around town, Gus shuts down all work on the meth lab. Mike sends Werner's crew home, gives them full pay, and tells them to keep quiet.
He was worth 50 of you.
Gus later tells Mike that Werner's widow believed their story about a construction accident and was taken care of financially. It's too little too late for Mike, however. He pulls the plug on working with Gus for now. I guess the whole Werner situation was too much for him. But you can't blame Gus for not taking his side. He gave him every opportunity to make things work. In 50% off, Victor and Tyrus grab Nacho and bring him to Gus, where things get serious. Fast. Gus threatens Nacho's father if he doesn't go through with his deal. Gus wants Nacho to get close to Lalo, earn his trust, and feed Gus every detail he can about operations. Not really a fair deal. What does Nacho get out of all this? Either way, he accepts. Mike, meanwhile, is still haunted by killing an innocent man, and he's drinking way too much. He even snaps at Keely for no reason. Come on, Mike, you're better than that.
You're done. You are done!
At the courthouse, Jimmy's in full Saul mode, grabbing plea deals fast, avoiding trials, churning through clients, and stacking fees. Suzanne, the prosecutor from the heel stuff, isn't buying his act, and tells Jimmy they're settling everything face-to-face during their scheduled meeting. Jimmy isn't thrilled, so he bribes a janitor to stall them in the elevator, giving him time to strike a bunch of deals while Erickson's stuck listening. When Jimmy walks out feeling slick, he finds someone outside waiting for him. So Jimmy finds himself riding shotgun with Nacho, heading out to meet the infamous Lalo Salamanca, a man whose name alone puts Jimmy on edge before they even exchange words. When they meet, Lalo says he's heard of Saul Goodman through his cousin Tuco, and wastes no time getting to the point. He wants Jimmy to visit Domingo in jail and feed him a very specific story. Basically, Domingo got caught with some of that watered-down stock, and now he's in custody. Jimmy tries to hardball Lalo and throws out a super high fee just to see what happens. I bet he wasn't expecting this. Geez, if he has that much cash in his back pocket, can you imagine how much money he has hidden elsewhere?
I thought I was going to be swallowing condoms filled with heroin.
It's time to check in on Mike now, and he's still out drinking every night, and one evening, as he stumbles home, a group of goons follow him and try to mug him. But we all know what Mike's capable of. So with all the money in his pocket, Jimmy heads to the jail to carry out Lalo's plan and fills Domingo in on the story he is meant to stick to. But because this is a drug case, some agents from the DEA are present, Hank and Gomi. You can't complain about seeing them two on screen again. Although they're more than a match for Jimmy's Saul Goodman act, he manages to negotiate a deal that gets Domingo released in exchange for information about Gus Fring's dead drops. Jimmy reports back to Lalo, who is delighted with the result, while Nacho pulls Jimmy aside and warns him that once he starts working for people like Lalo, there is no going back. Nacho then updates Gus on what happened and explains Lalo's play with the dead drops, and Gus decides to let it continue, knowing that pulling the plug would reveal there's a mole on the inside. Back in Albuquerque, Kim is trying to juggle her pro bono work with Mesa Verde's growing demands, but Rich Schweikart insists she take the lead on dealing with a homeowner named Everett Acker, who is refusing to vacate a property the bank needs for a new call center. Kim tries to play tough, lays out the deal, and pushes hard, which earns the praise from Paige, but leaves Kim in a sticky situation, fighting for something she doesn't believe in. She heads home to talk to Jimmy about it, and he might have a plan to get Acker to budge. At the courthouse, Jimmy intercepts two of his discount clients, Sticky and Ron, just as they're about to switch to a public defender. But with a little bit of his Saul Goodman flair, Jimmy convinces them to stick with him instead. Howard hears about this and invites Jimmy to lunch, where he unexpectedly offers him a chance to return to HHM as a proper lawyer. He even goes as far as to admit to Jimmy that HHM might have mishandled things with him in the past. Better late than never, I guess. Jimmy is given time to think about it, and he watches Howard drive away in his car with the douchiest number plate you'll ever see.
Good to see you, Jimmy.
So that night, Jimmy visits a pawn shop, buys 3 bowling balls, and under cover of darkness launches them one by one over Howard's gate, smashing his expensive car and leaving without a word. By the way, Jimmy's plan for Acker is pretty simple. He's gonna represent him. Basically, it's the best of both worlds. And Kim knows that Acker will be getting good representation. Think of it as her outsourcing her conscience to Jimmy. Actually, when you put it like that, it doesn't sound too good. Mike stops by Stacy's house expecting to watch Kaylee, only to be gently but firmly told that she's hired someone else, saying she no longer feels safe leaving Kaylee with him after his angry outburst. Gutted, Mike walks the street alone until he's ambushed by the same thugs he fought off before, only this time, they beat him up and badly stab him. When he finally wakes up, Mike finds himself bandaged and alone in an unfamiliar pueblo, somewhere far from Albuquerque with no clue how he got there or who brought him in. It turns out the place belongs to Gus, and at its center stands a stone fountain marked with the name Max Arciniega, the partner of Gus that was killed by Don Eladio for some power play in Breaking Bad. Basically the whole reason he hates the cartel and the Salamancas. But getting back to Mike, his wounds have been carefully treated by Dr. Barry Goodman, who calmly advises Mike to rest and remain under the gentle care of Senora Cortazar, the housekeeper and cook who now tends to his recovery. Obviously, Mike's confused by the help because the last time he and Gus spoke, Mike told him to stick to his job, so he tries to call him, but the phone just rings out. But a few days later, Gus shows up at the pueblo and tells Mike that he wants him to be a part of what he's building. He understands what it means to hate the Salamancas and wants Mike to help him. Back in Albuquerque, Jimmy continues throwing every trick in the book at the Mesa Verde eviction case, using loopholes, red tape, and staged theatrics to buy Acker more time. He files to change Acker's house number, buries fake native artifacts in the yard, and even spray paints a crude but convincing image of Jesus onto the side of the house, all in an effort to stall the inevitable. Kim tries to use the fact that Jimmy's her boyfriend as an excuse to step away from the case as a conflict of interest, but Kevin says it doesn't matter, and that she's a hell of a lawyer who gets things done. Yeah, I bet she really wanted that praise. In response, Kim delegates every detail to her firm's associates while quietly watching the chaos unfold from a distance. Rich Schweikart urges Kevin to reconsider relocating the call center, but Kevin doubles down and refuses to give up the land.
That call center's not moving one goddamn inch!
With no clean resolution in sight, Jimmy offhandedly suggests they could dig up something personal on Kevin and use it to force a compromise, though he stops short of pushing it. Kim grabs this idea and starts running with it, however, thinking of all the ways she can put a stop to the branch. That's when Jimmy suggests Trevor from GTA. He breaks into Kevin's house and starts taking snaps of stuff that Jimmy and Kim could potentially use against him. He gives the photos to the pair, and they flip through the surveillance photos until something catches Kim's eye. In Wexler v. McGill, Jimmy is in the middle of directing another elaborate con with his film crew when Kim arrives and tells him she doesn't want to go through with blackmailing Kevin, and that the whole thing has gone too far. So instead, she's offering Acker a fair settlement, one she's personally willing to top off out of her own pocket to reach $75,000. Meanwhile, Nacho meets with Gus, Mike, and Victor to deliver word that Lalo plans to expose Gus's street-level dealers to the cops. Gus orders Victor to ensure that only low-level workers take the fall, even if it means cycling in new ones, and then calmly informs Nacho he now answers directly to Mike. It's crazy how the world works. A few seasons ago, Nacho was Mike's boss. After Gus leaves, Nacho warns Mike just how dangerous Gus really is, especially after threatening Nacho's father, but Mike reminds him that's the cost of choosing this life. To fight back against Lalo, Mike drops an anonymous tip to the police about Lalo's car and location because he's a wanted man for killing the credit union worker. Back at Schweikart and Coakley, Jimmy derails the Mesa Verde settlement meeting by showing up unannounced and demanding $4 million for Acker.
$4 million.
$4 million. Very funny.
Obviously, Kim is totally confused as to what he's doing, but Jimmy has a plan. It turns out that the Mesa Verde's logo is a stolen image. Jimmy swings for the fences with this story. Kevin can't believe his name, his father's name, and the company rep is being dragged through the mud, so he caves and decides to move the call center somewhere else. Kim is furious with Jimmy, and after the meeting she gives him an ultimatum. Either they end things, move out, and never speak to each other again, or I'd pick the second option there, Jimmy, if I were you. The next episode opens with Jimmy and Kim getting married in a civil, low-key ceremony. The idea is that due to spousal privilege, Jimmy can tell Kim all about his schemes without her needing to report them to the police. Lalo is still in jail after being arrested, and obviously he's gonna need representation. So Nacho calls Jimmy to come and give them a hand. Jimmy comes up with an idea to use a fake name for Lalo, as if the cops 100% know he's a cartel member, he'll never make bail. Lalo then tells Jimmy that he'll be handsomely rewarded for this and he'll always be a friend of the cartel. So Jimmy sets Lalo up as Jorge de Guzman, a local man who's just eerily similar looking to big-time cartel member Lalo Salamanca. Meanwhile, Nacho tells Mike that Lalo wants him to torch one of Gus's restaurants. In Houston, Gus meets with Peter Schuler and Lydia, updating them on the lab while warning that Lalo is still a live threat. By the way, Peter is the head of a fast food at Madrigal, so he's kinda like Gus's silent partner. To get Lalo out, Gus needs Jimmy to win, so Mike slips Jimmy a report under an alias, which is full of holes in the case, and Jimmy uses it at the bail hearing to accuse the police of witness tampering. So this, along with the Jorge de Guzman shtick, gets Lalo out of jail. The judge isn't fully convinced though, so they set Lalo's bail at $7 million. Jimmy's obviously seeing stars thinking he's failed, but Lalo just tells him he'll get the money somehow. After the case, Jimmy leaves and is again pestered by Howard into joining HHM, and then the penny drops. Howard realizes it's Jimmy who's been messing with him. So he rescinds the offer of work and begins to walk away, but Jimmy won't let him leave without having the last word. Well, more than one word actually.
You can't conceive of what I'm capable of! I'm so far beyond you!
The episode Bagman opens up with the cousins arriving at a cartel stash site deep in Mexico, where they pick up 2 duffel bags stuffed with Lalo Salamanca's bail. As they drive off, an informant makes a call to a rival gang, tipping them off about what's about to go down. And the worst part is, Jimmy is in the middle of it, because Lalo wants him to go out into the desert, collect his bail at another stash point, and bring it back. He's not doing it for nothing though. Lalo promises 100 grand to him for a little delivery job. He tells Kim, and she obviously begs him not to go, reminding him that he's a lawyer, not a drug cartel's courier. But Jimmy brushes it off, believing that no one would ever suspect a guy like him to be the bagman. The next morning, Jimmy meets the cousins, collects the cash, and starts his drive back. But barely an hour in, things go wrong fast. He's intercepted by some armed men, and they're not messing around. Suddenly, gunshots explode from the hills. An unseen sniper drops the gunmen one by one, scattering them and destroying their vehicles. The shooter is, of course, Mike. He's sent by Gus to shadow the job and keep Jimmy alive as he caught wind of the ambush. The problem is, Jimmy's car is a wreck, and so is Mike's, so the pair push the cars off the road, snag the cash, and try to walk back to civilization. They take an age to walk back, even having to spend a night under the stars. Obviously, this worries Kim, who bluffs her way into meeting Lalo face to face to find out what's going on. Lalo doesn't know, but he knows Jimmy's alive. Not because he's been told, but he views himself as, well, why don't you hear it from the man himself?
He's like the cucaracha, you know? Born survivor.
If trouble found him, give it a day.
Back out in the desert, the boys find some water and it spurs them on for the last leg of the journey. They eventually find a gas station and end up buying isotonic drinks out the wazoo to rehydrate themselves before hitching a ride back to Albuquerque with Victor and Tyrus. So, with the money in hand, Jimmy walks into court and posts Lalo's bail in full, just as promised. Lalo is released, and he asks Jimmy what happened out there in the desert because things took a little longer than Lalo thought. Sticking to the plan he and Mike agreed on, Jimmy says his car broke down and he walked the rest of the way alone, hauling the money on foot to keep it safe. Lalo buys the story, at least for now, and tells Jimmy he plans to skip town and head back to Mexico, so the American justice system can't keep track of him. Back home, Kim tends to Jimmy's sunburned face and bruises while he repeats the same version of the story he gave to Lalo, but she can tell he's hiding something. Her eyes lock on the coffee mug he carried through the desert, now punctured with a clean bullet hole. And that's all she needed to know. Meanwhile, Mike reports back to Gus, who quickly realizes it was Juan Bolsa who orchestrated the attack on Jimmy, all to keep Gus's operation in check without tipping the balance. The next morning, Jimmy pushes himself back into his routine, insisting he's fine, but he finally admits to Mike that something's wrong, that he can't sleep, can't stop replaying what's happened over and over, and actually, Mike has some good news for him. He tells Jimmy that eventually, one day, he'll just stop thinking about all of this stuff. Really assuring Mike. Then, Kim quits Schweikart and Coakley, handing off the Mesa Verde account without ceremony, and walks away with nothing but her pro bono cases and the old tequila bottle stopper she once kept as a reminder of the games she used to play with Jimmy. So she heads back home to tell him her decision. But their conversation is stopped in its tracks by a call from Mike, who tells them that Lalo is back in town and he's looking for Jimmy. He shows up at their apartment and asks Jimmy to tell the story again from the top, then casually mentions he went out to the desert and found the car. Not broken down, but full of bullet holes. Jimmy tries to hold his story together, but it's not looking good.
I just want what happened. I told you what happened. Did you?
That is, until Kim steps in. Lalo just stares directly at them before heading back to his car, where he tells Nacho that they're not quite done in Albuquerque. After that ordeal, Jimmy and Kim hole up in a hotel room, lying low in case they're just in the eye of the Salamanca storm. Mike then tells Gus that Lalo and Nacho have gone south to Lalo's family home in Chihuahua. Gus sees this as a great opportunity to take Lalo out of the picture altogether, so he dispatches a kill team and uses Nacho as his inside mole to steer the Salamancas into Gus's team, which is almost like a death sentence for Nacho. Nacho goes through with it and is welcomed like family, but the warmth doesn't last. He's told to open the back gate at 3 a.m. sharp, prepping the estate for Gus's men. Back in Albuquerque, Jimmy confronts Mike, demanding to know why he's been pulling strings behind the scenes, why he's watching his and Kim's life, and is there more to this that Jimmy should know? Mike comes clean and tells him that Lalo is going to be dealt with tonight, and this'll all be over real soon. So Jimmy rushes back to tell Kim, but before he can get out, Kim has a plan to mess with Howard, and Jimmy, as usual, is all ears. Basically, Kim wants to sabotage Howard's life for the next few weeks to make it seem like he's some addict to force a settlement with the Sandpiper people. Over in Mexico, the clock strikes 3 and the assassins storm in, mowing down guards and family members. Lalo manages to escape thanks to an escape tunnel that goes under the house. The guards end up shooting themselves in the tunnel, and those who survive are quickly killed by Lalo. Well, all but one. He forces a lone survivor to make a call and tell their boss that they've killed Lalo. He then finishes off the survivor and scans the house to account for all the dead bodies. But when he goes searching for Nacho's body, it's nowhere to be found. Lalo knows he's been betrayed. Season 6 kicks off with Juan Bolsa calling Gus to tell him that the cartel thinks Nacho helped kill Lalo. And now, there's a price on his head. Gus listens but doesn't buy it. If the hit was successful, then why is every single gunman dead? Nacho is now in hiding, taking shelter in a quiet motel where he finds some cash, a gun, and a burner phone. He calls Tyrus, who tells him to lay low until they say otherwise. He tries Mike too, probably hoping for something more solid, but Mike doesn't answer. Back in Albuquerque, the prosecutors are digging into Lalo's case and start to question Jimmy's role in all of it. So they call him in and they tell him Lalo's name, family, everything was fake. He even slips up himself. After that car crash of a meeting, Jimmy does just enough to keep them off his tail, but now it's time to mess with Howard. At the country club, Kim watches from a distance while Jimmy sneaks into the locker room and plants a fake bag of drugs. When Howard finds the bag, he brushes it off, but Cliff Main is in the locker room with him, and he's not so sure it's fake.
Not the first time I've seen one of those, unfortunately.
Well, where did it come from?
Meanwhile, Lalo's ready to cross back into the States, but calls Hector first and says he knows the Chicken Man is behind the hit. Hector dings his way into telling his nephew that he has to get evidence that the cartel can't ignore. And that's when he remembers Gus's underground project. In Carrot and Stick, Juan Bolsa and Gus meet with Hector to grieve over Lalo's supposed death. But something about Hector's reaction doesn't sit right with Gus. He watches the old man closely and sees it in his eyes. He now knows for sure that Lalo's not dead. Meanwhile, Juan's crew cracks open a duplicate safe left behind at Lalo's compound and find exactly what Lalo wanted them to see, an offshore account number and a motel contact tied to Nacho. Down in Mexico, Nacho realizes he's being watched and sneaks out the back to confront the man keeping tabs on him. When he finds out the guy's reporting to Gus, he starts piecing things together and starts to think that Gus has sold him out to the cartel. We know he hasn't, it's just Lalo who's pulling the strings. That night, the cousins and the cartel hit team descend on the motel. A gunfight erupts, and while one gunman nearly kills Nacho, the cousins stop him just in time, because they want Nacho alive. He takes their mercy and escapes in a stolen truck, wounded, but free. Back in Albuquerque, Mike wants to head south and find Nacho himself, but Gus has another idea. Why not use Nacho's father as bait? Mike refuses, because this is the sort of stuff he didn't want to be involved with when Gus met him at the Pueblo. But just as the tension rises, Nacho calls. Back on the Howard hate train, Jimmy tracks down the Kettlemans and ropes them into a con, planting the idea that Howard's alleged cocaine use ruined Craig's defense. They run with it, trying to hire Clifford Maine, who quickly shuts it down. But as we know, he's already weary of Howard's drug use, and he's starting to get concerned. Nacho's truck breaks down in the middle of nowhere, so he abandons it and crawls inside an old oil tanker, hiding there in the dark while the cousins sweep the area. He waits until nightfall, then slips out and disappears. By morning, he finds a mechanic's shop, cleans up, and makes a quiet final call to his father. No explanations, just a goodbye. Then he calls Mike, says he's ready to end it, but only if Gus agrees to keep his father safe. Gus accepts, and his men smuggle Nacho back into the States. To sell the story, Mike beats him up just enough to make it look real. Man, what is it with Mike having to hurt people he secretly really likes? Back in the city, Jimmy and Kim are deep in the next stages of the Sandpiper plan. They're working on duplicating Howard's car and stupid license plates, but soon realize getting access to the real thing would be way easier. With help from Huel, they clone his keys and unlock the remote. Meanwhile, Suzanne connects Jimmy to Lalo and Nacho and tells Kim that Lalo is dead, and begs Kim to persuade Jimmy to cooperate in helping them piece the case together. Out in the desert, Gus and his men meet with Bolsa, Hector, and the cousins. Nacho is delivered just like they promised. He confesses to working with the Alvarezes, a rival gang, then says he tried to kill Hector. But instead of running, Nacho does this. He then fires a bullet into his own head and takes his own life before the cartel could. Nacho was such a great character, it's sad it ended that way. But you know, I'm actually glad he took things into his own hands. While Howard is inside his therapist's office, Jimmy takes his chance to slip into character. And no, I don't mean Saul Goodman. Now, he's suited and booted as Howard. Jimmy uses the fake key to borrow his car for a little scene they've cooked up. He picks up Wendy, the local meth head from a motel, and drives right past Kim and Cliff Maine, then slams the brakes and yells until Wendy stumbles out. Cliff sees Howard once again in the middle of some drug-fueled adventure and is now seriously worried. Jimmy then takes Howard's car back to the therapist's office, just in time for Howard to come out and not notice a thing. While Kim is driving Wendy back to her motel, she notices that a few cars keep following her, so she approaches them, but they just blow her off. That night, Mike shows up and tells them that those men work for him, and he believes Lalo's still alive. He says they're watching anyone Lalo might try to reach, including her and Jimmy.
We're watching anyone in my contact. That includes you and your husband.
Kim immediately realizes Mike's the one who saved Jimmy's life in the desert, and asks why he's telling her that Lalo is alive instead of Jimmy. Speaking of him, he notices everyone at the courthouse is giving him the cold shoulder, and Bill Oakley tells him it's because he defended Lalo. But on the other side of town, word has spread, and now every small-time crook wants Saul Goodman in their corner. I suppose business is business. Kim decides to keep the truth about Lalo to herself, especially as Jimmy is building a booming criminal law practice out of thin air. With clients lining up around the block, he convinces Francesca to come on board as his assistant, promising a real office and real money, even if everything about the operation is a little sideways. After seeing all of the stuff with Howard, Cliff confronts him in some sort of intervention, but it doesn't go down well. Howard puts things together and realizes that Jimmy's behind this too. Obviously, Cliff just marks him down as a paranoid junkie, but Howard knows this has Jimmy's fingerprints all over it. So what does Howard do? Sue him? Call the police? No. He has a boxing match with Jimmy. It ends quickly and Howard wins. But he's convinced it's not over, so he hires a private investigator to follow Jimmy. Across town, Gus can't sleep, haunted by the idea that Lalo's not dead. He and Mike visit the meth lab construction site, and while everything looks in order, Gus moves quietly, inspecting the grounds before slipping a handgun into the track of an excavator, just in case he needs it for later. Lalo isn't anywhere near Gus though. He's managed to get himself all the way over to Germany to see Werner's widow, and she tells him that Werner was working on a lab for Gus. So with this info in mind, Lalo is ready to strike. In Axe and Grind, Howard sits across from his wife Cheryl in a cold, quiet kitchen, trying to explain that he's being targeted by Jimmy and that all these stories she might be hearing from the likes of Cliff Main are completely false. Meanwhile, Howard's private investigator reports back, saying everything in Jimmy and Kim's lives looks routine, except for one odd detail, a recent $20,000 cash withdrawal. Jimmy and Kim meet Dr. Caldera at his backroom vet clinic to test out a new drug, part of the next phase in their plan to take Howard down. Cliff then invites Kim to a Santa Fe lunch with a legal foundation that could help her take a pro bono work to the next level. She's thrilled until she realizes it falls on D-Day, the day their plan against Howard is set to unfold. Why didn't they call it Namaste? Sorry, I couldn't resist. Jimmy reassures her he can pull it off without her, and heads out to stage fake photos of the Sandpiper mediator Rand Casimiro with his film crew. Francesca then makes a call, posing as Sandpiper's plaintiff's relative to get the conference line info. But on D-Day, things start to go wrong. Jimmy spots the real Casimiro at a liquor store, and to his horror, the man's arm is in a cast, a detail that's completely missing in their staged photos. So he calls Kim and says they need to abort and try again later. Kim listens, hangs up, and without a word, throws the wheel hard, flips her car around, and races back to Albuquerque. Because that girl wants to hit Howard where it hurts way more than she wants to do a job for Davis and Maine. The morning of the Sandpiper mediation, Jimmy, Kim, and the film crew race against the clock, scrambling to reshoot the fake photos of Rand Casimiro's double, only this time with a phony cast to match the real Casimiro's broken arm. They coat the pictures with an eye-dilating drug they got from Dr. Caldera and slip them to Howard's private investigator, who's been secretly working for Jimmy and Kim from the start. How's that for a plot twist? They won't be able to top a twist like that in this episode, right? At HHM, just before the mediation begins, Howard examines the photos, convinced he's caught Jimmy red-handed, passing a payoff to the mediator. On the conference call, Jimmy and Kim listen from afar as Howard accuses Casimiro of corruption, loudly calling out the man he believes he saw in the photographs. But when he runs to grab the evidence, he finds the photos have been swapped. Howard's frantic outburst derails the entire mediation, and with no time to recover, HHM and Davis and Maine are forced to accept a lower settlement than they wanted. Oh, and Howard's got huge "I'm so high on drugs" eyes. Meanwhile, Lalo spends days watching Gus's laundry facility, filming a message for Don Eladio where he claims to have proof of Gus's betrayal. Knowing Gus is listening, he feeds Hector false intel, saying the attack will come that night. Mike hears the call and beefs up Gus's security, pulling guards from other locations. That evening, Howard shows up at Jimmy and Kim's apartment, furious, knowing they're the ones who did all this to him. He lays it all out. From the car switch to the fake photos, he demands to know why they did it. Before they can answer, the door opens, and Lalo walks in.
Who are you? Me? Nobody.
He asks who Howard is, but before he can really respond, Lalo has an answer of his own. Okay, yeah, they can top that twist from earlier. Is it weird that I felt bad for Howard? Did he really deserve that? Whatever happens from here on out, though, Jimmy and Kim have crossed the line that they'll never come back from. After Lalo shoots Howard dead in their apartment, he calmly hands Jimmy and Kim an address and a rough description of Gus Fring, then tells Jimmy to go there and kill the man. Jimmy weirdly convinces Lalo that he's the one who should stay put and it's Kim who should pull the trigger. I guess it helps when Lalo thinks of him like a literal insect. So Lalo sends her out into the night with a loaded gun, then ties Jimmy to a chair and starts talking. He then tells Jimmy what happened in Mexico, how Nacho betrayed him and let the team in. Jimmy denies everything, tries to shift the blame, but Lalo doesn't buy it. He gags Jimmy and leaves, promising they'll continue the conversation later. As for now, he's got bigger chicken to fry. Kim makes it all the way to Gus's front door. Before she can knock, she's met by Mike.
Shoot him. I'm supposed to shoot him.
She blurts out everything that Lalo's alive. He's holding Jimmy, and he thinks Gus is the target, and that's when Mike realizes that this whole thing is a setup to distract Gus. The real move is happening elsewhere, so Gus races to the laundry. At the laundromat, Lalo is already inside and he ambushes the guards and takes Gus down into the half-built meth lab, filming everything still as evidence for Don Eladio. He films the lab, commenting on the chicken man, but Gus grabs his attention and kills the lights. In the darkness, Gus reaches the pistol he stashed in the excavator earlier and fires blindly, as does Lalo. And when the lights come up, we see who's been hit. Lalo dies of his wounds, and yet another Salamanca dies at the hands of Gus. Back at the apartment, Jimmy and Kim are reunited. Mike tells them it's over and that Lalo won't be coming back. His men remove Howard's body and explain the cover story. They'll stage a suicide, say Howard was a drug addict who drowned, and it'll all line up with the lies Jimmy and Kim have already told. We then see Mike and Gus's men burying both Lalo and Howard under the floor of the meth lab. By the way, just as a little tidbit, Bob Odenkirk suffered a heart attack while filming this episode. It's really not hard to see why. That was intense. Gus travels deep into cartel territory to meet with Don Eladio and the other bosses at his lavish estate, where Juan Bolsa reads aloud Hector's statement, claiming Lalo survived the ambush Gus orchestrated and was later killed. But with no body and no evidence of Lalo's brief resurrection, Eladio brushes off Hector's accusations as wild ramblings of an old ill man. To smooth things over and avoid bloodshed, Eladio draws a new line in the sand. Gus will take the northern territory around Albuquerque, while the Salamancas hold on to the South Valley. Mike then pays a visit to Nacho's father, Manuel. He breaks the news, says Nacho is gone, says the Salamancas won't come after him anymore, and promises that justice will be served. But Manuel doesn't agree. Jimmy and Kim attend Howard's memorial at HHM and watch as the firm prepares to rebrand and downsize in the wake of the scandal. Cheryl corners them, wanting to know if they have anything to say about what happened to him. You know, considering he told her that Jimmy was basically harassing him. But Kim leans hard into the lie, even going so far as to suggest that Cheryl ignored Howard's drug problem. The next morning, Kim quietly hands in her resignation, giving up her law license for good. Jimmy rushes home, confused, begging her to stop, but she's already packed. She tells him she loves him, but they're poisoned together and that everything they touch turns to dirt.
Don't do this. Kim, please.
Kim leaves, and time skips forward, a further 5 years, where there's a little less hair on Jimmy's head and way more cash in his bank. He even has his own stupid number plate. But yeah, we're into Saul Goodman times now. But we don't stay there for long, as the episode Nippy completely takes place in Omaha with Gene Takovic. I'll still call him Jimmy just for ease though. It's not a super important episode, but it's important to note that he befriends an old lady called Marion, as well as her son Jeff. Jeff recognizes him from his old days as Saul Goodman, so to keep his secret, Jimmy begins putting together a mall heist on the behalf of Jeff. Jimmy uses his Cinnabon treats to distract prison guards while Jeff and his friend take what they can. After the successful heist, Jimmy warns Jeff that this is the end of it, and if he doesn't want him to report this to the police, he'll keep the Saul Goodman stuff well under wraps. I don't want to excite you guys or anything, but the next episode's title is Breaking Bad, and it doesn't disappoint. We're pulled into some extra scenes from the time Walt and Jesse took Jimmy hostage in the desert. In the new scenes, we see Jimmy marching into Walt and Jesse's RV where they begin to discuss details.
You're Heisenberg. Wow.
Flash forward again to 2010 with Gene. He makes a secret call to Francesca from a payphone in the middle of nowhere and she fills him in on everything. But mainly that Kim called her to see how he was doing and that understandably hit him hard. For some reason, having heard that news, he decides to get back into the game, hitting up Jeff again and this time running a con that targets rich loners. Things continue to tumble out of control for Jimmy when he breaks into a man's house for no real reason other than to feel the buzz again. He might say that, but I think deep down part of Jimmy wants to be caught. The episode Waterworks opens up with a flashback to Kim coming to the famous Saul Goodman office to finalize her and Jimmy's divorce. And he doesn't even seem that fazed. We then get to see where Miss Wexler is today, working at Palm Coast Sprinkler in Florida, answering phones. She's becoming nothing but a cold pencil pusher. That is, until Jimmy calls. He rings her from a payphone, just wanting to touch base, but there's too much history there. Instead of arguing though, she tells Jimmy to turn himself in and that, weirdly, she's glad he's alive. The call triggers something in her, however, and Kim flies to Albuquerque, where she walks into Cheryl Hamlin's home and hands her a signed affidavit, which is basically like a powerful confession that outlines the entire scheme to ruin Howard's life and reputation and the devastating reality of how he died. Kim says she submitted it to the district attorney, though she doubts it will lead to charges without evidence. And on her way home, everything is just too much to handle. Back in Omaha, Jimmy breaks into another man's home, rifling through drawers, photographing financial records, and pocketing luxury watches like it's second nature. He then leaves the house to find Jeff panicking as a nearby cop car approaches, but in his panic, he crashes the car, giving Jimmy enough time to escape as Jeff is arrested. Jeff uses his one phone call to ask Jimmy for help, and so Jimmy contacts Marion for bail money. But she starts asking questions, becoming suspicious of Jimmy, and starts to feel like she's seen him somewhere before. So she gets on the internet and starts searching. When Jimmy shows up, she calls him out on the whole Saul Goodman thing. He tries to keep her quiet about it all, even disconnecting phone lines in her home, but as she's an old lady, she's wearing a life alert button, and you best believe she presses it. Come on, Marion. Don't you know that snitches get stitches? The next episode opens with Jimmy asking Mike and Walt what they'd change if they could go back in time. Mike's got a simple answer. He wishes he never took that first bribe. If he didn't, Maddie would still be alive. Walt, on the other hand, is less than happy to talk about hypotheticals. Back in 2010, the jig is up. Jimmy gets caught by the Omaha police while hiding in a trash can. Maybe that's quite fitting when I think about it. To represent him, Jimmy calls old reliable Bill Oakley, maybe the one person who might help. Facing a lifetime behind bars for his part in Walter White's empire, Jimmy negotiates things down to 30 years. But then, Marie shows up.
They tell me they found you in a garbage dumpster. Well, that makes sense.
See, Marie gets it. She then goes on to say that Jimmy is equally guilty for the deaths of both Hank and Gomi, but it's not long before he's back running his mouth. And the room. You see, Jimmy always was pound for pound the greatest lawyer of all time, and now he's going to prove it. He starts manipulating the feds, telling them he could sway a jury by playing the victim to Walt's harsh crimes, that they've treated him so unfairly. And in an instant, he's brought his sentence down to a measly 7.5 years at the best prison in the country with a complimentary pint of mint ice cream every week. Back in Florida, Kim's slowly coming back to life, volunteering at a free legal clinic, finding something close to purpose again. Then she gets a call. It's Suzanne, and she tells her Jimmy's dragging her name into court. So Kim flies to Albuquerque, walks into the hearing, and bares herself as she's about to be brought into the Saul Goodman world. But instead of using the same energy he had in negotiations, he stands in the dock not as Saul, but as Jimmy. And he tells the truth. He confesses to everything. Not just the crimes, but the guilt. The part he played in Walt's rise, in Chuck's unraveling, in every lie that brought him to where he is. I guess he figures he owes Kim that much. The courtroom goes quiet. Even the judge is stunned. But in the end, Jimmy McGill is sentenced to 86 years in prison, which is half of the initial 190 years. The inmates know who he is and treat him like royalty, and one day Jimmy gets pulled from his cell because he's got a visitor. They don't say much. They just share a cigarette in silence, just like the old days. When she leaves, he walks to the yard fence, watching her go, and lifts his fingers. 2 silent shots, the old finger guns still aimed only at her. And maybe, for the first time in his life, Jimmy has found peace. Now, that's what I call a TV show. And somehow, Vince Gilligan has written not one, but 2 perfect endings to 2 of the greatest TV shows of all time. Out of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, which do you think was the best? You'll have to let me know down below. I'll catch you in the next one.